let's watch something.
In
More positive here.
1998, Mexico banned the planting of genetically engineered corn to protect their agricultural heritage.
In Mexico, there are literally hundreds of varieties of corn. Some of them are adapted to very wet climates, some to very dry climates. Some of them are resistant to certain specific pests. Some of them have different tastes. Some of them are good for doing popcorn that was invented by the Aztecs. Some varieties are good to make tortillas or to feed the cattle. There's a whole bunch of kinds of corn in Mexico.
Around 7,000 years ago, the people who lived in Mexico started domesticating maize, or corn, and an intimate relationship developed between humans and the plant. Corn is not only their food supply, it is also part of the culture.
In the mountains in Jalisco, the farmers plant on purpose their cornfields near areas where the wild corn grows, the teocintle. And the reason why they do that is because they know perfectly well that they get resistance to pests transferred from the wild strain into the cultivated strain.
We don't know which parts of that diversity are going to be useful, and we need to preserve them all. Now, most of the diversity for crops is contained within so-called landraces. These are the plants that small farmers, generally in very diverse areas of the world, maintain in very small plots with selection for the very specific conditions of the plots, which might be certain altitude, frost or drought, or very specific conditions. That is really the basis of diversity that we are continuously tapping from to maintain our commercial production of crops, to feed the world, basically.
The 1970 corn blight in the United States destroyed millions of acres of corn. The U.S. was lucky to find a strain of landrace corn originally from Mexico that could resist the blight. In the year 2000, Dr. Chapella discovered genetically modified corn growing in this remote area. The campesino farmers had bought kernels of unlabeled American GM corn from their local government store to eat. And as farmers have done for thousands of years, they ate some and planted some.
Farmers make no difference between seed and grain for the obvious reason that grains are seeds and are viable seeds. They have a little embryo. They have the little baby inside the seed, and if you put it in the ground, it will germinate.
The genetically modified seed crossed with the landrace corn, and contamination entered the gene line of this ancient grain.
Ese maíz se come, se está vendiendo a toda la población y en todo México, supongo.
Porque no saben en realidad qué consecuencias puede tener.
Es un maíz para consumo humano, entonces, ¿cómo va a ser malo, no?
It is cheaper for Mexicans to buy imported corn from the United States than it is to grow it themselves. This is because American corn is subsidized by the taxpayers, whereas Mexican corn is not subsidized. Nevertheless, many Mexicans prefer to grow their native corn varieties.
¿Por qué usted está tan necio de estar plantando la misma semilla todos los años? ¿Cuál no comprar?
Bueno, nosotros lo tomamos como un ahorro, porque también a veces, digamos, falta de económico, pues no tenemos que correr a la CONASUP para comprarlo. Sin embargo, estamos comiendo, según nosotros estamos comiendo lo mejor, porque es un maíz que es...
Todo eso. Sí. Es que el trabajo que ustedes hacen aquí es un trabajo que reditúa, pero para el mundo.
Sí.
The farmers said, if we do have transgenic elements in our corn, is it going to be like our colleague in Canada? Will the multinational companies come and demand payment for the presence of the gene?
In November 2001, Dr. Chapela published a peer-reviewed paper in the science journal Nature revealing the GMO contamination.
We took this very seriously from the beginning, and we have been doing studies and collecting samples and sending them around, trying first to duplicate Ignacio Chapela's results, which we did, and now going a step further and identify this problem.
This is an issue that is a bit contentious because we didn't want to in any way jeopardize our genetic heritage. The first thing is we didn't want that to happen. Whether that is going to have other consequences, well, that's a matter of debate. The fact is, those sequences were not supposed to be in those corns, and they are now. And that's a big problem for us.
What happens when you introduce into these areas a single genotype, the one industrial crop, that preferentially passes its genes into the progeny? What happens is basically you crowd out that diversity. And this in the long term is a major threat to food security. Not only for those people who live there, but also for us, also for our industrial production of food. If we do not have access to those genetic resources, we're going to be facing challenges that we are not going to be able to solve.
It is not just genetically modified corn that has raised patenting issues in Mexico.
Current international system of patents does not protect in any way traditional knowledge, and we have had a number of problems in Mexico related to that. I think there are 3 or 4 applications for patents for tortillas. Like it was a new thing, like somebody had invented tortillas, which of course have existed for 3,000, 5,000 years, we don't know. First of all, some people will debate, and I think it is a worthwhile debate, if life should be patented at all. And that's a discussion that humanity as a species hasn't done properly. And it is a sort of pending homework, something we need to do.
By the year 2003, the U.S. had sold millions of pounds of GMO corn to Mexico for less than the cost of growing it.
So they could sell that corn because of NAFTA. You know, it took down the barriers. So we subsidize our corn. Subsidized corn is sold for a cheaper price to Mexico than the people could grow it for themselves. So there was a lot of outcry against Ignacio Chapela's paper that he published in Nature, saying that there had been contamination. So Nature, which is a very prestigious scientific publication, they didn't actually retract it, which is kind of a scientific term. They just said they shouldn't have published it. And then they did the studies, they continued to do the studies, and they found that what he said had happened actually had happened. And so just recently, this year, Mexico went through the courts, and finally the Supreme Court of Mexico just said a few months ago that now GMO corn is banned in Mexico to grow it or import it. So that's a little victory, and of course they'll still keep fighting about it, but That's the good news. Took 15 years. 15 years. So I'm going to just go through these next two things because I'm kind of moving along here. These are the prices of genetically engineered seed. You see the prices have gone way up for farmers. This is about farmers and the fact that they're kind of being forced into this GMO regime because they can't get the non-GMO seeds. And they say that GMO increases yield, but what they do is it doesn't have anything to do with yield. They take high-yielding seeds and genetically engineer resistance to Roundup into them. So that's great. That's some things that have changed for the better. So let's watch a little more.
A lot of people in the industry try and paint a picture that, listen, 60% of our food is processed food, has some genetic engineered product in it, so forget it, it's over. Your resistance is useless. Well, this is nonsense. The vast majority of our foods, the wheat, the rice, our fruits, our vegetables, are not genetically engineered. The vast majority of the food we eat is not genetically engineered. But right now, probably the key issue is the current controversy over genetically engineered wheat.
Even some of the farmers that thought they might like genetically modified canola originally are saying no to genetically modified wheat. We had the Canadian Wheat Board sitting at the table with Greenpeace and the Canadian Health Coalition, the Council of Canadians, and a whole bunch of farm organizations. And they had a news conference to release a letter to the Prime Minister that said, we don't want GM wheat. And that letter was signed by an additional 200 organizations.
Genetically modified wheat is a very, very serious concern for us up in North Dakota, and we have 124 acres of GMO wheat planted in research plots throughout the state. We don't know where those research plots are, although that's proprietary information. So there's already the potential for contamination. Custom combiner combines some GMO wheat and then goes to combining some non-GMO wheat, the contamination is going to occur. When it does, we'll lose our markets. It's that simple.
What Monsanto told our legislature here in North Dakota was that if they attempted to put a moratorium on the introduction of this wheat, that one, they would pull all of their research dollars out of our state and our universities, which I quite frankly was very happy to hear, and two, they would file a lawsuit against the state of North Dakota for anti-commerce. This was the way that they tried to sell us, the state, a new product.
So these are the GM crops around the world, mostly grown. See, most of the places in the world they're not grown. I'd like to say this is a done deal, it's accepted, the science is done, the world has accepted it. They've actually haven't. It's mostly the United States, Brazil, Argentina, India, which is just cotton, huge controversy about eggplant there, and Canada. Every place else is very, very small. And usually where they're not grown, they're banned these days. Like the EU, they've opted out. They call opted out for having them there. This is the total GM area by country, the USA, the same USA, Brazil, Argentina, India, Canada. Every place else is very small. It's the same crops it was 15 years ago. Yeah, I mean, there's this organization called CBAN, which is Canadian. They do really good research. There's a whole bunch of really good websites and, all kinds of, make sure you get the right ones. There's one called GMO Science that's also good because they're trying to amass enough information about why these are not a good idea and, to make that, there is a tipping point. A lot of countries a lot of these countries just grow cotton, which isn't a food crop. So it's basically these few countries and these few crops. It's still corn, soybean, cotton, and canola, sugar beets, in some countries, alfalfa, papaya, and a little bit of squash. GM crops around the world, the same crops, soybean, corn, cotton, and canola, same it was 15 years ago, so it's not being accepted.